Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, you would think with all the time management stuff that's been dumped on the world, we would be better at it. But the truth is, time is marching on, and we still got to take care of it as leaders. And today, I want us to take these next few minutes, use this time to try to help a bunch of people out there who keep telling me I'm having a hard time managing my time. So this ought to be a fun conversation. I look forward to your thoughts here on how it'll help me. I'm sure listening to what you got to say, I'm sure it's going to help me manage my time better. We're trying to help a bunch of people today, so I think this is a good topic.
Well, I think it's a great topic, and I wish I had the forethought decades ago to actually log the questions that I've received from leaders. And you and I have talked about this. I think we're in agreement that the number one question that we've gotten over these many years is, yes, but how? How do you do things? And that's why you and I both have chosen to be so painfully pragmatic. But I think the second most often question that I get, at least in the last 5 to 10 years, is help me with my time. Help me with my time in one form or another. You know, what can I do to better steward my time? What can I do to better use my time? What can I do to protect my time? It's just that one resource that is completely and totally finite. And I'm meeting more and more leaders that are running into that.
Yeah, and I'll just say this. You and I have been doing this a long time. I think we added it up maybe 75 years together from as leaders. I mean, and if you think back over that time, Mark, decades each, has there ever been a time where this is not an issue? I mean, this is not important, because as leaders, really, it is our most precious resource. You could argue is not our resources. It's not the people. It's not it is our time. I mean, it's really the one thing that is limited. They're not making any more time, the old saying goes. And so how we steward that, or how we take care of it or manage it, or whatever language you want to put on that, it is so vital for effectiveness. If we don't get this right, we're going to have a hard time reaching our potential.
So I think today we'll share some tips and some ideas and some things that you and I have attempted with some degree of success. But let me offer this disclaimer. This is something I work on every day of my life. And so I anticipate that I'll work on it for the rest of my life. So don't look for the end all be all solution today, but maybe we can give you some tactics that'll help you push the ball down the field.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. It's that we're all in a battle for this. I mean, he might even say a war. I mean, I don't want to compare it to a war, but I mean, it really is. I mean, there is at least a fist fight going on here for how your calendar is going to stay under control. And somebody told me one time, if you don't tell your time where to go, somebody else will. And I think that's a good reminder. Just as we kick off here, that this is important, but it is doable. It is something that we have control over for the most part. I know sometimes we have people that we answer to, but we choose to answer to who we choose to answer to as well. So there's a lot that we have to go on there. So I like what you said there. Let's give them some tips, some things that maybe can, even mindset. I'll start with a mindset kind of idea here. And I think that what I would say maybe more than anything is don't try to do everything. I think so many leaders, we become enamored with this, like, I can do that, I can do this. And the next thing you know, we've got our hands in maybe way more than we need to, things that we're not necessarily good at, things that we may be good at, but it might not be the highest, best use of our time. And I think sometimes we just have this almost, what's the old FOMO, this fear of missing out on something. I'm not sure what drives it. But I think even in human nature, we sometimes we are too scattered, not focused enough. And I think as leaders, especially the higher up we go in an organization, we've got to be more focused if we're going to be more effective.
Yeah, but let me say, I do think I know one of the drivers. Again, I'm not a psychologist, and I have to remind myself of that all the time. But I do know one of the drivers is the optimism that defines and characterizes most successful leaders. I mean, in fact, I don't know any pessimistic leaders that are successful. And so I think this can-do spirit serves us well in our role, because we're actually trying to create the unseen, right? We're trying to create a reality that doesn't yet exist. If we're not optimistic, we probably wouldn't be up for the task. But I think the spillover of that optimism makes us underestimate the amount of time that things will require, and overestimate the amount of things that we can accomplish in any block of time. So I think that's a key driver. And I don't know if that helps you or not, but I don't think you're alone. Most leaders I know, that's one of the reasons they struggle.
Okay, so if we can't do everything, is there a second one that you give us another one to think about here?
Yeah, I think you've got to decide what is important. What are your priorities? And I'll be the first to acknowledge that they do shift over time. And to your opening comments a few moments ago, we don't totally control this, right? We serve at the pleasure of the people and the organization, but we have tremendous influence on where we invest and steward our time. And so I think we have to know what's important. What are our priorities? And if you don't know that, I think you're a ship without a rudder.
Yeah, almost this start with the end in mind kind of mindset. It's like, what are you've asked me for years, or you said for years, maybe the most powerful question is, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think having that mindset of knowing, or at least knowing what it is you're trying to do, that is the starting point. It's a powerful reminder to let's just go back. What are we trying to do? And let's just push. I like your rudder on the ship analogy there. Let's make sure that the rudder is turned toward, or at least that the navigation system, however we want to talk about that, is turned toward the coordinates that they're supposed to be turned toward. Because if not, again, I think we just get scattered and our time gets sucked up if we're not careful.
Yeah, the unfocused leader is the leader that has undermined their own effectiveness, whether it was self-inflicted or whether it was imposed by external forces. If you're not focused, you're not effective.
I think it was that great, maybe from the great leadership expert Alice in Wonderland, that we get to quote something like, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." Something like to that effect. And I think there's so many leaders that are they're under the auspice of, and I've heard people say this before, I have no idea where we're going, but we're making good time. And I think we're wasting time if we don't know where we're going. So it's important for us to really lock this down and be, as we talk about so many times with organizations, to be strategic and not sporadic. And I think time is one of those places where we get very sporadic if we're not careful.
At least to understand your intention. Again, you're going to have days that are going to blow up and you don't get to work on what you wanted to work on, or you don't get to focus as much time and energy as you intended on a particular problem or opportunity or activity, but at least have your intentions clear. What are your priorities?
That's a great question. Okay, so you said that time is one of the things over the last few years you hear the people ask you the most about. I'm guessing, because this happens to me, maybe the second or 1A on that list is, how do you stay in balance, especially when it comes to this time question. And I have people ask me all the time, like, how do I achieve balance? Because it feels like I'm trying to do this and then this gets out of whack, or if I pay attention to that, then over here I'm struggling. Balance is it's an interesting question. I would argue it might even be a myth. We'll talk about that here, but you got a thought for the person who says, how do I stay in balance?
Yeah, I think you're asking the wrong question. Balance is a human and physical impossibility. I mean, by definition, it would denote an equal measure of focus, priority, and emphasis. I mean, you think about the old teeter-totter on the playground. It's in balance when the weight is the same on both sides. And when you think about all the areas of your life that matter to you, whether it's your family, your fitness, your faith, your finances, your vocation, and others, right? Whatever those are, it's a human and physical impossibility to put equal time, energy, and effort in each of those categories. So I think you really need to default to our previous response. You have to decide what are your priorities. And I think we need to elongate our perspective that you may have balance over 6 months or a year, but you may not, and you probably would never have balance in a day or even in a week. And even then, I think it's the wrong concept. But you will be more balanced when you think you're going to spend more time with your family. You may not this week, but next week you're on vacation or whatever. So I think elongating the perspective helps, but don't strive for balance. Live your life with intention. Decide what's important and then allocate and invest your resources, your time, energy, and effort accordingly. Now, one other way to approach this, some of our listeners may know the name John Ortberg, is a friend of mine, and he challenged me years ago that this balance concept was not right. And I said, well, John, what do you think we should pursue instead? And he said, you need to pursue a well-ordered heart. Now, for those listening or watching, you may or may not be a person of faith, but here's how John defined that. He said, arrange your life in such a fashion that you're growing in love for God and love for people. And he said, and if you are, you have a well-ordered heart. And if both of those things aren't true, then you need to make some adjustments. Using the vernacular of this conversation, he would say, if those two things aren't true, you're out of balance. Yeah. So just think about it. Don't try to say, how much time did I spend on my family this week? And I've got to match that and equal that with my work and with my fitness and with recreation and with friends. You're just going to be frustrated forever.
Yeah. And if we go back to the, and that does sound like something that Ortberg would say, that's so good. But if we go back to the seesaw, and maybe people don't even know what a teeter-totter or a seesaw is, that's been a long, they probably have outlawed those from playgrounds. I'm not sure, but it would have been no fun at all had you said, we've got to have the equal weight on both sides, and we're just going to try to have, the beauty of the thing was it would go up and down and you'd have fun with that. So maybe people need to Google a seesaw there. But I've got a friend, and I love this. He had a professor who told him that balance was learning to live in the center of the tension. There's always going to be tension. And I think your point, Mark, that it really is a myth. There's no time where you're going to have everything in your life equal, or it's all working, everything's humming. It may feel that way for a day or so, but just give it a day or so, and then everything's going to be out of whack again. And so I think this chasing after, perfection in every area and an equal amount of time. I think that's what you said there. And there's never going to be a time where you're going to spend the exact amount of time at every place as it relates to your time. And so I think I think it'd be, if anybody's listening, it'd be really good if they just said, I'm not even going to try to be in balance. That's not the goal. I'm going to try to have a well-ordered heart. I think that's really a great way to say it there. I'm going to try to have a well-ordered life, however you want to.
Even if you don't buy the well-ordered heart definition that John proposed, think about a life of intention that is aligned with your priorities. It goes back to knowing what's important, and are you investing your time accordingly? And I don't want to make that sound easy, but it should be clear.
Yeah. Now you say invest your time accordingly. If a leader's listening, we would, and let's make this our next one. Let's say not accordingly, but carefully. I think a leader has got to steward their time carefully, because there are lots of opportunities. There are lots of projects. There are lots of people. There's all kinds of things that we can do. If we're not careful, we can literally be investing our time in the wrong thing. And I think as leaders, we've got to discern what is go back to my phrase a minute ago, what is the highest, best use of my time? And I think leaders get caught in that trap so often that they end up doing things that somebody else probably could do, and then nobody's doing what only the leader could do.
Right. It goes back to something you said in the opening comments. I think when a leader acknowledges that our time is the most valuable thing that we possess, It's not even our intellect. It's not our relationships. It's not our assets. It's where we invest our leadership energy. And if you think about how much many leaders, I wouldn't say this universally, but how much they are attuned to the finances of their organization and their personal finances, well, there's something more valuable than financial resources, and it's our limited and finite time. And once you elevate time to its rightful position, my belief is that most leaders will then be more careful how they deploy that resource.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so a lot of mindset stuff that we've been talking about here, how we think about our time. Let's get very practical here and just let's think about what do we do with our time. And I think we can run off 4 or 5 here before the end of our episode today. 4 or 5 more ideas. So let's just start with the idea of just planning your day. I think there's so much power in planning your day, right? Let's start there. What would you say about this?
Well, first, I would say that there are a lot of people listening that are going, yeah, you got to be kidding me. And I'm not saying things aren't going to happen. And I've already said, and Randy has reinforced, your time is not totally your own, but do you have intention? Are you thinking about your time strategically? And there are, as Randy mentioned, many, many books out there on time and priority management. So, we're not going to get into all of the nitty gritty of that, but a couple things to think about as you plan your day. What would you like to happen? What needs to happen? And I think you can take several things into account as you answer that question. One is when is your best time during the day? Some of you are real good in the morning and some are better in the afternoon. I always say I'm pretty good around lunch. But if you're a morning person and that's when your creativity is flowing and the ideas are just hard to capture because you have so many of those, well, don't spend that time doing email. Block that time for your creative work and your problem solving work. Think about working in chunks of time as much as possible. And I know some leaders that's impossible, but you'll do better work in most every case if you've got an hour as opposed to 10 minutes. And so look for chunks of time. So those are a couple things to keep in mind. I know many leaders that have different disciplines around this, but my practice and many leaders I know is maybe on the weekend, you look at your upcoming week. Now, for most of us, those activities have been on the calendar for weeks or months, sometimes years in advance, but you can begin to get your head around it and what adjustments might you need to make and what questions could you ask. I'm taking a trip later today, and I sent a note to my assistant, and I said, hey, let's look at some alternative flights to get home because I think I'm going to have more time than we originally thought when I finish my engagement. So I'm looking even on the fly to create an optimal plan for each and every day, knowing that it's not all going to work out perfectly, but I'd rather have a plan that we modify than just to wing the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know your schedule for this trip, but just the idea of you being able to grab a couple hours back. I mean, you've got to be looking for that. So I love that idea of planning. I'll say this on you mentioned looking ahead for the week. One of the things that I will say here is you and I both have an annual plan. So we have a plan for the year. We're working on a quarterly plan where, I mean, you kind of break that down. But one of the things I do, you mentioned weekends, is I always look at my, every weekend, I will look at my upcoming month, which you're like, well, why do you need to do that? You just looked at it last week. Don't you remember what you've got coming up? I do, but you always get to extend that a week as the next 5-6 weeks, what's going on. And then every weekend, I also look at my upcoming week. I have 2 different times where I will look at that. And so you get to there. Nobody can tell. I mean, there's things that people can tell me to do with my time if I'm not an owner or a leader or of the department. I mean, maybe I answer to somebody, but there are things that I get to do with my time when I think about my, they don't control all of your time. And so I would encourage anybody to spend more time planning. I think a couple things you said there that are interesting to me. it's knowing where your time is going, I think is a big idea. And you have talked about this maybe as much as any leader I've that I've known. I know Peter Drucker talked about this, but this idea of auditing your time and knowing where is my time really going, I think is a big deal. And so this idea of tracking your time, I'd love to hear just a thought or two from you on that, Mark, the power of tracking your time.
Well, the idea for me originated with Peter Drucker. For those in the audience that may not know who Drucker was, he was one of the early management and leadership thinkers. And often I refer to his resources as the source of the Nile. He was writing about the things you and I talk about today 50 years ago.
Yeah.
One of his more famous books is called The Effective Executive, which was published in 1966. And the last time I checked, they're still using it as a textbook in colleges. It's just a little bitty thin.
I was going to say,
book.
don't scare people with the textbook idea, because it's only maybe 100 pages, Mark. I mean, this is not a hard read.
So powerful, so powerful.
Great stuff.
And one of the things that he said leaders need to do in order to be more effective, the chapter is called Know Thy Time. And he's written about this and talked about this more widely, but the essence of it is he suggested that leaders would track their time at least twice a year, every 6 months, and to track it for 2 weeks, and that you would always be surprised where your time went. And he said the more advanced version of that is try to guess where your time went, and then to do the audit you referenced. And he said, you will be shocked and amazed every time. Well, as I was doing that over time, I learned so much. I said, well, why would I only track my time a couple times a year if it is so insightful? And so I don't know how many years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I went to tracking all of my time. And I've taken one more step. It's not just an audit, it's a planning tool. And so I try to figure out, where do I want to spend my time over the next 12 months categorically? How much time do I want to invest in creating content? How much time do I want to spend curating and learning? How much time do I want to spend communicating? How many keynotes and workshops do I want to do? And then we try to plan the calendar accordingly. And so to me, that's taken it to another whole level. And I would argue that I'm probably as effective today as I've been in my life. And this single practice is probably at the heart of that.
Yeah. So if you're listening, that might be a good something that you could try very quickly. You could literally begin to track your time for the next couple of weeks and see if what you said was going to happen is really happening, and be able to even look back and
let me give one more word about that. I would just say, to simplify it, pick 5 or 6 categories. I mentioned a couple of mine: communicating and creating content. Another for me is administration. And that's where a lot of the junk goes. I mean, it's stuff you have to do, but I work really, really hard to keep that number as small as possible. And when I see it getting larger, we go to work and say, okay, why is this growing? And what can we do about it? Are we in a lot of meetings that we don't need to be in? Am I spending too much time on email? Whatever those administrative tasks are, because it takes away from the higher value add stuff that's in the other categories.
Those are expensive emails. if it's an owner or a high level leader, that's good. Okay. So we plan our time, or plan our day, we track our time. I think another thing I would want to say here in this conversation, so relevant, is that we need to say no more often than we do. And we don't have to say no all the time, but so many times we can just say no to things, and then it doesn't end up being on our schedule. Everything on your schedule you said yes to. I mean, if you think about it that way, it's just that simple. And so I want us to become better at saying no. And there are things that, again, we don't have to do everything to be effective. In fact, I would argue that the more we do, many times the less effective we're going to be. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive to think about it that way. There's a great resource, and I think we've talked about this before. That kind of ties in here. Henry Cloud, Mark, you know Henry. he wrote a book called Necessary Endings, and he talks about he talks about basically ending things that need to end. But one of the ideas in there that he uses, it's applicable this time of year. I maybe need to get Henry's gardener to come do a little work here at the house because some of our plants are not that healthy, but it's probably because we haven't spent time pruning those things. And that concept in the book that he writes about of the rose bush only having so many nutrients for it, it just doesn't have enough nutrients for all the buds. And so wise gardener prunes back those buds, and all of a sudden you'll see those things explode. We just saw, the Masters a couple weeks ago. I can only imagine the landscaping staff. Those azaleas look pretty good on TV when I was watching there, Mark, but they've had a lot of attention given to those. And I think when it comes to our time, we've got to say no. We've got to prune some things if we're going to really flourish. That to me is a really good reminder to anybody listening. What can you say no to this week?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. This is an area of struggle for me, and it has been for a long time, because I've not only got to learn to say no, but those around me have got to learn to say no, because I ultimately do agree, as you said, to things on my calendar. But I found something on my calendar last week that somebody on the team said yes on my behalf and already signed a contract, and it probably should have been a no. So it's not only something you've got to do, but you've got to help those around you understand that more is rarely better. I mean, there are some circumstances when more is better, but as it relates to your time, it's just finite, and the best leaders say no.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about this next one here, actually on the podcast a little bit, and one of the things that you and I have studied this some with some friends of ours over the last year or so. But this concept of margin, having some time on our calendar to what we would call to stop and think. And so if we're going to protect our time and steward our time, perhaps we won't create any more time, but we'll create different ways to use our time. One of the ways that we would say is an effective use of your time is to spend some of it in margin. Mark, will you unpack that? Because I think so many people would hear the word margin, they're thinking, oh, I get a vacation, or I'm going to get to be on a break, or that's not exactly what this is an active use of your time. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, this is not about vacation. I'm all about rest and restoration and recreation, but we're talking about margin as a leadership discipline. When do you have time on your calendar set aside to reflect, to assess, and to create? And I meet far too many leaders that tell me they don't. And I said, well, who's doing those critical activities? Because if you're not, you can bet the people around you aren't. And so it's something that I've been a fan and advocate of for decades. I was encouraged when Harvard just released a study a couple of years back. They looked at the calendars of CEOs, and it was a 12-year study. Now, I've never been a CEO. I know a lot of CEOs, and I know it's a demanding role and responsibility. Whether you're running a small enterprise or a huge one, it's a big job, right? That's where the buck stops in an organization. So they looked at these CEOs' calendars for 12 years, and they found that they spend 28% of their time in a typical week alone. And somebody asked me, well, what do you think they're doing in that time? I said, I think they're reflecting, they're assessing, and they're creating. I think that's what they're doing. And whether you're the CEO or not, I think every leader needs to have dedicated time to reflect, to assess, and to create. Now, your first question, because I've had this question enough to know, is how much time is the right amount of time? Like, do I need to think about 28%? It's like, I have no idea how much time you need in this critical and crucial activity. Here's what I know. The bigger your dreams, the bigger your challenges, the bigger your obstacles, the more time you're going to need to reflect, to assess, and to create. And if you've never experimented with this, I'd encourage you to book 1 hour next week. 1 hour. again, that may be woefully inadequate, but it's a start. And actually put it on your calendar. It's a meeting with yourself. And so then with full integrity, when somebody says, hey, can you meet next Thursday at 4:00? You can look at your calendar and say, no, I'm sorry, I've already got a meeting.
Yeah.
Honor that time, protect that time. Here's my prediction. If you will make margin part of your normal routine, it won't take long for you to realize this is your greatest contribution to your team or your organization. It's that important.
It really is, Mark. And I would say, just in a practical way, and we haven't really talked about technology today, but technology can be, it's a good time saver. I mean, it can help us maximize our time in so many ways, but it can be a time suck as well. And so I would just encourage anybody that's going to try this margin experiment for an hour. I would say you're allowed to, and you can do what you want to, but I would say you're allowed to take a legal pad and a pen, and that's it. No phone, no technology. Just go. You go find a place to reflect and assess and create for an hour and watch what happens to your world around you. I promise you, it will get better. It'll get more focused. There's just nothing better than that. And so
I was going to say, we're probably going deeper than we need to here, but you can tell it's something we're both passionate about. And we've seen it transform leaders and their teams and their organizations. But this is not a new idea. That was one of the things that we discovered when we were doing our research on leadership effectiveness. This is a practice that goes back thousands of years. If you look at the most successful leaders, you'll find margin was part of their lifestyle.
Yeah, that's so true. So good. Okay. So we're running out of time, but I've got a couple more thoughts here I want us to think about for a second. The first one I would say is let's just remind people that your work is not your life. And when we talk about time, it is bigger than 9 to 5. It is 24/7 if you want to really get down to it. You have all that time to decide where it goes, what to do with it. And so I just want to remind people that, again, your work is not your life. It is important to work on the right things when you're working, but it's also important to think about how you use your time outside of work. I believe, and it won't surprise anybody, writing a book, Winning Begins at Home, which is a book sort of about family and, that kind of thing, building a great family. But I believe that what happens outside of work in all the areas of your life, the way you take care of your body, your finances, your soul, you fill in the blank, those things really are going to help position you to win back at work. And I think there's this virtuous deal going on when we manage our time correctly. So I just want to remind people that this is not just about how you use your time at work. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but that to me is, I think sometimes we think we're just going to, be maniacal about this work schedule and then not really think about how we use our time outside of work. And we end up not replenishing ourselves. We don't rest the way we need to. We don't take care of ourselves the way we need to, because we're just thinking about work all the time. And there's more to life than work.
Yeah. And I would maybe summarize it by saying your work is not your life, but your time is.
That's really good. It's really good. Okay. So we got one more here. I want you to unpack this last idea, because the truth is we're going to mess this up. You and I have been messing it up for 75 combined years, longer than that. If you think about even before we became official leaders, this is hard. This is not some easy thing. You're going to listen to this episode. No, I manage my time well now. What would you say to the person who finds themselves struggling next week after having heard this?
Well, you get to try again tomorrow. That's something, that's implied in this conversation. At midnight, the day is done. It's over, and you get a brand new one every single day. I've told people you actually have the opportunity and the challenge of slaying the dragon every day. And the fact that you won yesterday has no bearing on whether you will win today or not. And what happens today will not determine if you use your time strategically and steward it well tomorrow. Each day is its own capsule of opportunity.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so I want to give a little recommendation here. I mentioned earlier that this time deal is not a war, but there's a book, an old book. It's a play on Sun Tzu's Art of War, but this is a book written by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art. And basically Pressfield and his subtitle, Break Through the Blocks and Win the Inner Creative Battles. And this is a book, I would say this book is for creatives in a way, but I think there's an element of it that it is for leaders, these concepts. You got a copy as well. Look at there, The War of Art. So Pressfield's book. Here's what he says: the more important your work is, the more you can expect resistance to show up and try to block what it is you're trying to do. And I think resistance, it has all kind of names. Procrastination. I mean, you fill in your blank of what your resistance is that's going to show up. Sometimes it can be fear. Sometimes it can be success. I mean, there's all kind of things that can represent the resistance that holds you back from using your time wisely. And but he's got a quote here I thought was really great. He says, defeating resistance is like giving birth. It seems absolutely impossible until you remember that women have been pulling it off since the beginning of time. It really is. When you think about this idea of winning the war for your time, it does seem like it's impossible, but thankfully there are leaders who've been managing their schedules, managing their lives, stewarding their time would be the way we would say that, for decades. And most of us have benefited from the way people have used their time. And I would also say this, if there's any frustration that we've maybe felt in our past because we've not been well led, there's a good chance that it was because our leader was not using his or her time the way they should have been. And so we all are affected by that. I just want to remind anybody listening today, this is not just about you having your schedule the way it needs to be. Other people are going to either benefit or they're going to suffer based on the way we steward or don't steward our time. So Mark, I'll recommend to any leader, The War of Art. Great little book here. Again, a short one. I guess you and I like the short books, but this is a good one, worth a read for sure. Anybody trying to create anything or build anything, I think they'll benefit from that, and it'll speak to some of this conversation we've had today. I don't know if you have a final word for folks, but yeah, I think this is huge that we get this right.
Yeah, it is, and I would just say you can do this on some days, and some days it won't work, and then you try it again, and when you step back and look at the long arc of your influence, the more days you get it right, the more impact you're going to have.
We'll leave it there. That's fantastic. Hope you'll continue to share with your friends and family. Hit the like button if you've not done that. Leave us a review. We love that. But let's keep doing what we can to manage our time the best way we can, to steward that time the best way we can, because, again, we benefit, but others do as well. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.